LiSTNR production.
A prisoner serving 18 years for killing his childhood sweetheart escapes from prison and murders his girlfriend after finding her in bed with another man. He will never be a free man again. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insider's Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. In this week's judgment, it's the Crown versus Daniel Leslie Miles, a man whose propensity for violence led to not one, but two tragic murders. Miles first entered the spotlight at the age of 18 when he murdered his childhood sweetheart, Donna Newland, a crime that would send him to prison for 18 years. This was back in 1990, when Donna was just 16 years old. A relationship that started with youthful innocence turned dark, culminating in a fatal altercation. Miles's judgment for that crime reads as follows. They fell passionately in love and believed that their devotion to each other would last forever. At the end of 1989, Ms. Newland moved with her parents to the central coast of New South Wales, and in January 1990, the offender moved to Perth. Over the ensuing few months, there was correspondence between them which demonstrated the continued closeness and intensity of their relationship. However, over time, Ms. Newland established a new group of friends on the Central Coast and formed a relationship with another young man. The offender returned to Sydney from Perth, and it seems that Ms. Newland told him that she wanted to live her own life. She reiterated this when he visited her on the Central Coast, and she told him about her new relationship. Thereafter, he wrote her a barrage of letters from which it was clear that he was obsessed by her and by the idea that theirs was an eternal love and that he could not accept that the relationship had come to an end. He telephoned her regularly, the calls being affectionate at times, but abusive on other occasions. There was a body of evidence from former friends of the offender and Ms. Newland, which Her Honour accepted, that he told them of his intention to kill her. Ms. Newland travelled to Sydney to see the offender on the day before the killing, and they were observed to be very affectionate. Nevertheless, that night, he told a friend of his, whose evidence Her Honour also accepted, that he no longer loved Ms. Newland and that he was going to, pay her back by stabbing her. On October 20, 1990, following a breakup, Miles confronted Donna and, in a fit of rage, stabbed her to death. By way of background, I found an article from That's Life magazine published in August of 2021. It was written by Donna's older sister, Jennifer.
My little sister Donna was 20 months younger than me. Beautiful, fun, and sociable, she attracted friends like bees to a honeypot. When she was 14, Donna started seeing a guy named Daniel Miles, then 16. None of the family liked him as he was strange, sullen, and told her not to speak to any other boys. When she broke up with him about 18 months later and started seeing a lovely man, we were all relieved. Daniel, however, was furious about it. He told Donna, "If I can't have you, no one can." Terrified, she avoided him. Then, on October 20, 1990, Donna went to a party. That night, the police came to our house and they told us Donna had been killed. Mum began wailing, but my dad, John, who was deaf, didn't understand what was happening. I had to sign to him, "Donna is dead." It was the worst thing I've ever done. Seeing Dad crumble shattered my heart. Daniel had been at the party, so Donna left with friends, but he followed her. Luring her away from the others and into a park, he pushed her into a toilet block. Donna desperately tried to escape, but he stabbed her through the heart with a massive hunting knife. Daniel, then 18, rang police and told them they'd been attacked by muggers. An ambulance was called, but by the time it had rushed poor Donna to hospital, she bled out and passed away from her terrible injuries. She was just 16. I was 18 and felt so guilty. Donna and I had a stupid fight the day earlier, and I told her I never wanted to see her again. "I'm sorry, Donna," I sobbed at her funeral. The knife was found and identified as Daniel's. Found guilty of murder, Daniel Leslie Miles, then 20, was sentenced to 18 years in prison. We begged authorities to keep him in for life, certain he'd kill again, but they wouldn't. He pleaded not guilty, but was eventually convicted in 1992. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in prison, with a minimum serving of 12 and a half years.
While incarcerated, Miles showed limited interest in working through his issues, but initially did not pursue psychological counselling. He showed some redemption during his time in prison, developing musical talents and even assisting fellow inmates with music education, having been a rising music talent as a teenager. But it was ultimately his music that led to his second murder, a crime that would see him imprisoned for the rest of his life. In 1998, Miles befriended a woman named Yolanda Michael, a sex worker, who reached out to him after hearing his music. They shared a mutual friend to whom he provided a recording of some of his music. The judge found, in evidence before me, the offender said that he had some limited psychological counselling in the earlier part of his prison term, but that he did not pursue it because he saw his crime as, quote, a one-off thing that would never recur. I have the benefit of a report of Dr. Olav Nielsen, forensic psychiatrist, amplified by his oral evidence. Dr. Nielsen is well respected in his field and has first-hand knowledge extending over some years of the availability of psychiatric and psychological services within the prison system. He saw the offender's inadequate pursuit of counselling as the result primarily of a failure on the part of the program then in place to identify his needs and address them. That said, it may be that the necessity to deal with underlying personal problems was marked by his remarkable achievements whilst in prison, particularly in the field of music. He had learnt the piano as a child and was interested in music, but it was in jail that his creative and executant talents flowered. He developed into an accomplished instrumentalist, singer, and songwriter. At the correctional centre where he was housed, he was involved with education officers in setting up a recording studio where he recorded some of his songs. The judge said, "I have been impressed by what I have heard on a CD, which is in evidence." He was also assisting other prisoners as a peer tutor in music theory and audio engineering. Testimonials prior to his escape from the educational staff spoke most highly of his capacity, dependability, and commitment. It appears then that the offender had made significant progress towards rehabilitation, with the possibility of a musical career upon his release into the community. Tragically, however, it is these very achievements which led to his association with the victim of the murder for which he now stands for sentence. Yolanda Michael, having heard Miles's music, became interested in reaching out to him and in the later part of 1998 wrote to him. After they had corresponded for a time, she visited him. She became a regular visitor, as well as communicating with him by phone. Although she was aware of the crime for which he had been imprisoned, a loving relationship developed and they discussed marriage. I'll read from the judgment. It is the offender's account that in March 1999, Ms. Michael told him that she had been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness and also that she had been forced into prostitution. There is clear evidence that she had been a sex worker, but it may not have been true that she was forced into that occupation or that she suffered such an illness. Nevertheless, the offender said that he accepted what she had told him at face value, and it was this information which led him to contemplate escape. He discussed this with Ms. Michael, explaining that he would have the opportunity to escape in July, as he was expected then to achieve a C2 classification, which would entitle him to work outside the prison. They also discussed moving interstate with the two children and starting a new life. Fast forward to July 1999. Miles was classified for a work release program, but instead he escaped from John Maroney Correctional Centre intending to reunite with Yolanda. It was the decision that would cost another life. Miles arrived at Yolanda's house and surprised her. He spent the night with her before heading to Queensland to see an acquaintance who may have been able to provide somewhere for he and Yolanda to live. Miles returned to Sydney the following day. I'll read from Justice Peter Hidden's judgment. He returned to Sydney on the 31st of July, arriving around midnight. By the time he got to Ms. Michael's house, it was early the following morning. He said that he knocked on several windows of the house, only to hear Ms. Michael demanding that he leave or she would call the police. He thought that she might not have realised it was him. He looked through a curtain on one of the windows to see a man sitting next to Ms. Michael on a bed. That was a man with whom Ms. Michael had had an intimate relationship for a few months, although it appears to have been a casual one. The offender said, and I accept, that he has a patchy memory of what then occurred. However, the evidence establishes that he entered the house by smashing through glass doors leading onto a veranda. He said to Ms. Michael, "Why are you running away from me?" He dragged her towards the kitchen where he obtained a knife. Her children emerged from their room, crying and screaming. She, the children, and the other man fled from the house, but the offender chased her and stabbed her in the shoulder. The subsequent injuries, as detailed in the judgment, are too horrific to list. Yolanda died at the scene. Coming up, the judgment and sentencing. Back to the judgment. In the words of Justice Peter Hidden, the offender ran to a nearby house where he asked for medical assistance for a gash to his hand and a broken finger. He also asked that the police be called, saying there had been, quote-unquote, an accident. An occupant of that house called the ambulance and the police, and the offender waited at the house. He was arrested and was taken under police guard to Bankstown Hospital, where he underwent surgery for the injury to his hand. He was discharged later in the morning and taken to Bankstown Police Station, where he was interviewed. He said in evidence that, when he killed Ms. Michael, he was consumed by uncontrollable anger. He saw her rejection of him as a betrayal. He believed that by escaping he had turned his back on all that he had achieved during his years in prison, and it seemed to him that he had taken that dire step for nothing. The Crown prosecutor challenged the offender's account for his reason for escaping and of what occurred after he arrived at Ms. Michael's home. Ms. Michael had not visited him in prison after April 1999, some months prior to the escape, and he acknowledged that her last letter to him was received in either late May or early June. It is the Crown case that, in truth, he escaped because he feared for the future of the relationship and wanted to find out whether she was with another man. This, the Crown prosecutor argued, demonstrated an abnormal possessiveness similar to that which had led to his killing Ms. Newland years earlier. Back to the judgment, word for word. There is some other evidence tending to support that contention. I have copies of a large number of letters from the offender to Ms. Michael, and in some of them, his displeasure about difficulties in their relationship was expressed in no uncertain terms. In an undated letter he wrote, "You know I'm good enough, so why are you continuing to treat with utter disrespect? Honestly, babe, you're lucky you're not a bloke, or I would have broke your jaw. In fact, I've broke blokes' jaws for less than that." More significantly, in a letter of January 1999, he wrote, "I know you have a lot of confusion, but for fuck's sake, would you just turn to me, tell me everything and trust me? I do things, babe. I am not a talker. Just ask Donna when I told her to stop playing games with my heart or I would put a hole in her heart. If I say I'll do something, then believe I'll do it." Confronted with these passages in cross-examination, the offender said that he was affected by sleeping pills when he wrote them, and that on neither occasion was he suggesting that he would in fact inflict violence upon Ms. Michael. The passage from the letter of January 1999, of course, was a reference to the killing of Ms. Newland. In evidence, he described it as, his quote, "an indefensible analogy and a disgusting one at that." He said that it was written out of frustration and meant no more than that when he made a promise, he always kept it. He believed that people had treated Miss Michael badly in the past, and he was intending to assure her that he would not let her down. Miles was initially found guilty and sentenced to 21 years in jail. Justice Hiddens said, "Daniel Leslie Miles, on the charge of escaping from lawful custody, you are sentenced to imprisonment for 2 years to commence on 25th of April 2003. On the charge of murder, you are sentenced to imprisonment for 25 years to commence on 25th of April 2005. I fix a non-parole period of 19 years in respect of that charge. You will be eligible for release on parole on 25th of April 2024. The sentence raised eyebrows. The gravity of the crime led to significant legal scrutiny, and it didn't take long before the Crown sought to appeal that sentence. An appeal against the leniency was lodged by the Director of Public Prosecutions, and 2 Court of Criminal Appeal judges quashed Justice Hiddens' sentence. Judge Ian Carruthers said, "In my view, this case is one in which the sentence imposed at first instance displayed a leniency of such a magnitude that error should be assumed." So, Miles was sentenced to life without parole. Justice Carruthers marked him as a danger to society. But the impact of the story extends beyond the courtroom. As you heard in relation to Miles's first murder of teenager Donna Newland, Donna's sister Jennifer wrote about the rippling effect of Donna's murder across her family's lives. The pain of losing her sister at such a young age haunted them for decades. It's a poignant reminder of how violence impacts families beyond the courtroom, often leaving lasting scars that cannot heal. On hearing the decision back in 2002, Yolanda Michael's family stood up in court and cried out, Thank you for that. You don't know what it means for our family. It's all over for him now." Outside the court, her father Frank told reporters, "I am happy he has not got a chance to murder anybody else." Daniel Miles will never be released from prison. Just a reminder, if you or someone you know needs someone to talk to, call Lifeline on 13 11 14 and 1-800-RESPECT if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence. Thanks for listening to Crime Insider's Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at LiSTNR Crime or TikTok at LiSTNR Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins. Thanks for listening. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.